Hi everyone, we're gonna critically discuss and unpack the film The Bourne Identity, 2002, in this video. We begin by stepping into the shoes of a man who wakes with no past, no name, and no anchor. His only companions the scars carved into his body and a mystery etched into his mind. As he claws his way toward identity, every shadow hides an enemy, and every silence hums with danger. Next, we'll peel back the layers of its mystery, uncovering the symbols and secrets hidden in every frame. Then, we'll slip behind the curtain to see how it was crafted. Those bold production choices, unforgettable design moments, and on-set sparks of improvisation that brought this world to life. We'll even show you where to stream it on its official platforms, so you can join the adventure firsthand. And before we close, we'll trace the ripples it's made in cinema and in our hearts, exploring the legacy it leaves behind. If you live for stories that twist your sense of time and deepen with each revisit, hit like, subscribe, and let's journey into this altered timeline together. The first thing that strikes you is silence. A man's body floats adrift in the dark swell of the Mediterranean, limp as if discarded by fate. He is pulled from the sea by fishermen who are less curious about who he is than about whether he is still alive. In his hip, lodged under the skin, they find a tiny device, its glow projecting a bank account number. That is all the past offers him. No name, no memory, no clue to the skills hidden in his sinew. And yet when threatened, his hands move with deadly precision. Somewhere in his blood runs the muscle memory of a life he cannot recall, and in that contradiction begins his journey. The beauty of the story lies not in explosive spectacle but in the quiet terror of uncertainty. To know nothing of oneself, and yet to be hunted by forces that know you better than you know yourself, creates a tension that never slackens. This isn't a tale of conquest, it is a tale of reclamation. Each street corner, each flicker of recognition, brings him closer to a truth he isn't sure he wants to face. Alongside him moves a woman swept into his orbit by chance, their uneasy alliance forming the fragile thread of trust in a world where every face could mask betrayal. The narrative unfolds like a map drawn in the dark. A bank vault in Zurich unlocks his first taste of reality. Passports, currencies, weapons, and the crushing realization that his life has been fractured into layers of lies. From there, pursuit becomes the rhythm of his existence. Police in one city, assassins in another, surveillance always circling like vultures overhead. Yet at the heart of all this urgency lies a question more intimate than survival. Is he the man these documents claim, or something far worse? The story teases with fragments, dangling clues like threads of a torn photograph. Each encounter, each memory flicker, each gun drawn in a crowded street builds toward the revelation that the enemy he fears most may not be outside, but within. Major twists ripple like aftershocks, the discovery that he is not simply a target but a weapon, trained and unleashed by forces that prefer shadows to accountability. The more he learns, the more his search for freedom collides with the truth of what freedom costs. What makes this tale linger is not just the chase across rooftops or the narrow escapes from death, but the quiet moments of recognition, the way a hand trembles before pulling a trigger, the way eyes search for a past that will never return. It is a story that pulls you not just through the cities of Europe but into the labyrinth of memory, where identity itself becomes a battlefield. Every scene suggests that the greatest struggle is not survival against others, but survival against the truth of oneself. This is only the surface of the journey, a tease of mysteries still unfolding, of betrayals still waiting to be revealed. In the shadows ahead lies the truth of who this man once was and the choice of who he will become. The chase is only beginning, and the world has no idea what it has awakened. A man without a past drifts into the world like a shadow reborn. His first memory is the cold slap of the sea, the sensation of drowning without end, until hands pull him from the abyss. The fishermen who rescue him whisper in another tongue, staring at the scars on his body as though they tell stories older than language. Under his skin, lodged like a secret that doesn't belong, they find a capsule containing a number that means nothing to them, but everything to him. It is the first breadcrumb of a trail he does not remember leaving. When he opens his eyes, there is no name on his tongue, no history in his bones, only an emptiness that frightens him more than death itself. On the deck of the trawler, the sea spray stinging his face, he becomes a creature of reflex. The fisherman who stitches his wounds recognizes the way his muscles respond even when his mind does not. Instinct guiding movements too precise, too deadly, to belong to an ordinary man. Knives fly from his hands as if guided by invisible strings, and yet he looks at them with the awe of a child seeing snow for the first time. Every motion betrays a past he cannot remember, a profession written in his body like a language he once knew and has since forgotten. When they dock at port, he is left to wander with only a battered coat and the fragment of a clue. The number etched into his memory from that capsule draws him into Zurich, where the stillness of the city's order hides a darker pulse. In the heart of a bank, he is led into a private vault that seems to recognize him even if he cannot recognize himself. Inside lies a suitcase heavy with meaning, stacks of foreign currencies, a gun cold as betrayal, and a fan of passports, each bearing his face yet marked with different names. He stares at the photos as if waiting for one to answer back, to leap off the page and claim him. None do. Instead, they mock him with multiplicity, suggesting that he is not one man but many, and perhaps none at all. The gun, though, does not feel foreign. His fingers close around it like returning to an old lover, familiar and effortless. But with the familiarity comes dread. If this weapon feels so natural, what does it say about the man holding it? The suitcase offers freedom and fear in equal measure, and with it comes a choice. Outside the bank's glass walls, he notices eyes on him. Men dressed in suits but carrying the posture of hunters. The first chase begins not with a sprint but with a realization: he is already prey. The streets of Zurich fold into labyrinths of stone and glass, alleys tightening around him like nooses. Police move to intercept him, drawn by whispers in earpieces he cannot hear. And then instinct takes over again. His body writes choreography he did not rehearse, vaulting walls, twisting through stairwells, blending with crowds, all while the terror in his chest grows louder than the footsteps behind him. In the blur of flight, a young woman enters his orbit, not by fate, but by necessity. She is stranded, desperate, and in need of money. He is desperate too, though his hunger is for a past rather than a future. He offers her payment to drive him to Paris, and though mistrust hangs heavy between them, she agrees. The journey becomes more than a ride across borders. In the cramped space of the car, silence weighs as heavily as suspicion. He struggles with words, fragments of memory flashing like lightning only to vanish before they form into storms. She studies him, noting the way he watches the mirrors more than the road, the way his hands hover near weapons he pretends not to carry. The bond between them is fragile, born not of trust but of shared escape, yet it begins to feel inevitable, as though destiny had braided their paths long before they crossed. Paris greets him with echoes of familiarity that sting like salt in wounds. The streets seem to know his footsteps, even as he denies them. In an apartment hidden in plain sight, he finds evidence of a life once lived. Clothes hanging neatly in closets, documents tucked away in drawers, and photographs that show his face but not his soul. Each artifact whispers, "This was you," but none answers the more frightening question, "Who are you now?" The young woman watches him sift through these relics of a stranger's life, torn between sympathy and fear. She senses the abyss inside him and wonders whether being near him means being pulled into it. Yet before questions can be formed, answers come in the shape of violence. Assassins descend upon the apartment like wolves, silent but merciless. The air shatters with glass and fists, and once again his body betrays him with its deadly grace. He moves with precision that shocks even himself, disarming and disabling his attackers as if dancing to a tune only he can hear. When the fight is over, the silence in the room is more terrifying than the noise had been. The young woman stares at him with eyes wide not only from fear but from recognition, that this man she barely knows has just revealed what kind of creature he truly is. From then on, survival is no longer passive but active. He knows now that he is hunted, not simply lost. The chase tightens around him, faceless men emerging in every city, their goal not to capture but to erase. In their pursuit lies a secret larger than himself, a network of shadows that extends into the highest echelons of power. Each step forward is a descent deeper into a labyrinth designed to keep him from the truth. Yet, the further he runs, the closer he comes to the realization that the enemy he fears most is not the ones chasing him, but the self that waits to be remembered. By the time the first half of this tale reaches its height, he has discovered only fragments, glimpses of a past as an operative for forces that thrive in silence, missions blurred by morality, and skills that make him both predator and prey. But these fragments do not heal the wound of amnesia. They deepen it, suggesting that the man he once was may not be worth finding at all. The young woman beside him becomes both tether and mirror, her presence reminding him that trust is still possible in a world where his own reflection feels foreign. The story pauses on the knife edge of revelation, the promise of truths still hidden in the shadows of Paris and beyond. Each answer leads to another question, each escape to another pursuit. The man without a name is closer than ever to the identity that has been stolen from him, but the closer he comes, the more dangerous the pursuit becomes. For those who chase him, for those who help him, and for himself. In the heart of Paris, silence becomes a weapon sharper than any blade. The man without memory finds himself surrounded not only by the ghosts of strangers' photographs and neatly folded clothes that once belonged to him, but also by the unrelenting knowledge that every corner of this city could conceal death. The young woman who chose to ride beside him no longer questions whether she should have left him behind. She knows it is far too late for that. Their paths have fused under fire, each pursuit tightening the bond between them. She has glimpsed the predator lurking inside him, the one he cannot remember but cannot deny. And now, hunted by those who once commanded his every move, the two of them step further into the labyrinth, knowing that every revelation will exact a price. The first half of the story left them fugitives, racing from assassins who seemed less like individuals and more like shadows cut from the same fabric. But as the second half unfolds, the game of pursuit transforms. No longer is he simply running from nameless enemies. He is unraveling the machinery that created him. Each encounter sharpens the edges of truth, showing him that his survival is not coincidence, it is design. He is not a man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. He is a man built for this, engineered to exist in the very spaces where others perish. And with each strike, each instinctive movement that saves his life, he begins to suspect that what lies at the core of his identity is something more terrifying than ignorance. Guilt. The threads pull him toward an answer, and those threads are stained with violence. One by one, assassins sent to erase him fall by his hand, their silence revealing more about his past than their words ever could. They are not random men, they are like him, cut from the same program, molded by the same unseen masters. When one of them falls in combat, his dying words are not curses but recognition, a subtle acknowledgement that the man he faces is not victim but brother, another soldier of the same shadow war. In that moment, the protagonist understands that he was not the exception but the rule. And if he wants to reclaim his life, he must break free of the very system that created him. His relationship with the woman becomes a strange lifeline in this storm. She represents what he lacks, an ordinary existence untouched by espionage and bloodshed. Her fear is real, but so is her loyalty, and in her gaze he begins to see a version of himself that is not defined by past crimes. Yet danger tightens its noose, and the closer he grows to her, the more the world punishes them both. Trust is a fragile thread, but it is the only thread he can hold. Together, they cross streets and borders, slipping through the cracks of a Europe too vast to be watched entirely, always a step ahead of those who wish to bury his existence. The cityscapes they pass through feel like mirrors of his mind, streets winding without end, buildings looming with secrets, shadows multiplying until one can no longer tell hunter from hunted. He confronts handlers who know his face too well, men who speak his name with familiarity he cannot return. Each confrontation burns away another veil of his ignorance. And then, piece by piece, the truth begins to crystallize. He was an operative of a program that stripped away names and replaced them with missions, training men to become living weapons. His skill, his instincts, his ability to vanish and strike, they were not accidents of fate. They were crafted, drilled into his marrow by a system that saw him not as a man, but as a tool. The climax builds as he finally comes face to face with the architects of his misery. A web of intelligence operatives and government handlers, seated in quiet offices, pulling strings that decide life and death without hesitation. To them, he is not a ghost. He is a liability. And liabilities must be erased. They unleash wave after wave of killers, but what they fail to realize is that the very weapon they forged now turns against them. With every encounter, he reclaims not just his survival, but his will. He refuses to be the nameless shadow they crafted. In one of the most searing confrontations, the memory of his last mission rises unbidden, flooding his mind with a clarity he has feared since waking in the sea. The target had been a man of influence, and he had approached with the calm of a predator closing in. But something had faltered inside him. A glimpse of children, a voice of conscience long buried, stopped him from pulling the trigger. It was not incompetence that ended his mission, it was humanity. That refusal marked him not only for failure but for death. His handlers sought to erase him for daring to remember compassion in a profession that required none. The revelation cuts deeper than any wound. He realizes that the abyss inside him is not simply memory lost, but morality regained. He is not only fleeing from his creators, he is rebelling against them. Every step away from their control is a step toward becoming human again. Yet freedom is not easily won. Blood marks the path, and each ally he gains feels as though they carry the target painted on his back. The young woman becomes his anchor, the reminder that there is life beyond the shadows. Together, they run not only for survival but for the chance at a future unmarked by constant flight. The moments between escapes, when laughter flickers despite the danger, when trust feels almost natural, are the fragments of humanity he clings to. They represent what could be, if he can sever the strings that bind him to the past. The final confrontations are brutal, not only in violence but in revelation. The suits behind the desks, the agents who once trained him, the assassins sent to silence him, they all form part of a machine that demands obedience. He, however, has remembered choice. And with that memory, he becomes something far more dangerous than the weapon they created. He becomes a man who refuses. As the smoke clears and the bodies of those who hunted him fall silent, the story does not end in triumph but in uncertainty. He has walked away from the machinery of shadows, but the machine still exists. It will not forgive him. It will not forget. Yet he has something it cannot control. His name, his will, his choice to live as more than the sum of missions completed and lives taken. When the dust of Europe settles behind them, he and the woman vanish into a quieter life, at least for the moment. The sea that once held him like a coffin now becomes a metaphor for rebirth. He began as a man pulled from the water with no identity. He ends as a man who, through violence, pain, and conscience, has forged one for himself. The chase has not ended, because men like him are never free of shadows, but for the first time, he is no longer running toward a past. He is running toward a future. The man without a name is less a character than a riddle wrapped in skin. He begins as absence, a blank slate floating in the sea, his body marked by scars and his mind stripped of history. What emerges in him is not the usual arc of growth but one of recognition. He is rediscovering himself like an archaeologist brushing dust from bones. Each reflex, each sudden burst of violence, becomes a clue. His hands remember what his mind refuses to accept. That tension, the war between instinct and conscience, is the soul of his character. What fascinates most is that he is not portrayed as a monster, though by all rights he could be. His efficiency in combat, his talent for escape, his ability to outwit those hunting him, all mark him as someone forged in secrecy and blood. Yet beneath that machinery lies a man haunted by compassion, revealed not in grand speeches but in the flickers of hesitation before pulling a trigger, in the way he looks at the woman who has chosen to stay by his side, in the doubt that constantly shadows his eyes. He is at once weapon and victim, soldier and deserter, predator and prey. His character is a paradox that refuses resolution. The young woman who enters his life in the most unlikely of circumstances becomes more than companion, she becomes conscience. Where he is fractured, she is whole. Where he hides in shadows, she speaks openly. Her role is not to fight alongside him but to remind him that he is more than the sum of his missions. Through her, the audience glimpses what he could be if freed from the machinery that built him. She watches his violence with horror, yet she also witnesses his humanity in moments of quiet tenderness. In her eyes, he sees not only the man he was but the man he could become. She is the mirror he cannot escape. What is remarkable is how her fear does not drive her away but binds her closer. She is terrified of what he represents, yet fascinated by the vulnerability that leaks through his facade. Their relationship is one of necessity at first, forged in desperation, but it evolves into something deeper, more fragile. In a world that constantly seeks to erase him, she chooses to remember him, to stand by him. That choice is more radical than any weapon he wields. The figures who hunt him, though often silent, embody a different kind of menace. They are his doubles, shadows of the same training and indoctrination. Each assassin he faces is a distorted reflection, a reminder that he is not unique. Their presence reinforces his alienation. If they are what he is meant to be, then his refusal to continue the cycle marks him as an outcast, a failure in the eyes of the system but perhaps a triumph in the eyes of humanity. When one of them dies at his hands, recognition passes between them, a brotherhood of killers who never chose their fates. That recognition deepens his dread, because he knows the line between himself and them is razor thin. Hovering above them all are the men in suits, the architects of the program that created him. They are not presented as flamboyant villains but as bureaucrats of death, calculating, cold, faceless in their authority. They embody a truth more chilling than any single assassin: that systems, not individuals, create monsters. His rebellion against them is not just personal. It is symbolic, a refusal of the very structure that turned men into weapons. The suits remind us that evil often hides in plain sight, dressed in ordinary clothes, speaking in measured tones, carrying out atrocities with a pen instead of the gun. In this web of characters, the protagonist becomes the gravitational center, pulling everyone else into orbit. His identity crisis defines their roles. The assassins show what he could become, the woman shows what he could be, the suits show what he was made to be. Each interaction forces him to confront himself, to peel back layers of the past he fears yet cannot ignore. His journey is less about evading bullets than about deciding who he is when the bullets stop flying. The emotional weight of his character comes from restraint. He does not indulge in confessions, nor does he give long explanations of his turmoil. Instead, his humanity surfaces in silences, in the flicker of doubt before violence, in the tenderness he shows when the world isn't watching. The tension between his lethal skill and his fragile morality keeps the audience tethered to him. He is not a hero in the traditional sense. He is something more complicated, more unsettling, and therefore more real. By the end, his identity is not handed back to him by any authority. He reclaims it through rejection. He chooses to define himself not by the names in his passports, nor by the missions that once carved his life into fragments, but by the simple act of living beyond them. That choice, quiet yet defiant, is the most human act of all. He does not become whole by remembering the past. He becomes whole by deciding the past no longer owns him. Every character around him becomes a brushstroke in the portrait of a man who should not exist and yet does. A man who embodies violence but clings to conscience. A man who has been used as a weapon yet dares to imagine being something else. In the clash between memory and morality, he finds not an answer but a path. And in following that path, he transforms from shadow into man. Sometimes, the strangest truths about a film are not the ones you see on screen, but the ones whispered in the margins of its making. The story of this film is a labyrinth in itself, not only because of its protagonist's fractured identity but because the production mirrored that same sense of confusion, reinvention, and constant pursuit of clarity. Behind the glossy frames lies a saga of clashing visions, rewrites upon rewrites, and a set where chaos often marched hand in hand with brilliance. To begin with, the film was not supposed to look or feel the way it eventually did. Its production became infamous for what many described as filmmaking by survival, much like the journey of its hero. Directors, writers, and studio executives all tugged at its identity, pulling it in different directions. Scripts were drafted and redrafted, entire sequences scrapped, and endings debated deep into post-production. The film was meant to be a straightforward espionage thriller, yet every stage of its creation added layers of unease, hesitation, and unexpected discovery. That uneasy energy, strangely enough, bled into the very fabric of the movie, creating a realism that audiences would later praise. One of the strangest facts about its making is that the lead actor himself was not the obvious choice for the role. At the time, he was better known for boyish charm and roles in romantic or dramatic projects, not for embodying a cold, efficient operative capable of dismantling opponents with brutal precision. The studio doubted whether he could carry the film, but he trained relentlessly, learning tactical combat, close-quarters techniques, and survival skills with such intensity that even the stunt coordinators marveled at how quickly he adapted. In truth, much like his character, he transformed into someone unexpected. Someone the audience could believe had been shaped into a weapon. The fights, though slick on screen, were brutal to stage. One peculiar detail is that many of the combat sequences were not heavily choreographed in the traditional sense. Instead, they were built around instinctive rough-edged styles designed to look raw and improvisational. The martial arts system known as Kali, with its sharp, efficient strikes, became the skeleton of these fights. It was a strange choice at the time. Hollywood was still steeped in stylized, flashy action. But here, the movements were meant to be practical, ugly even, the kind of violence born not from theatrics but necessity. That decision changed action cinema itself, spawning countless imitators who tried to mimic its stripped-down intensity. Then came the endless reshoots. The production dragged on well beyond its intended schedule, ballooning costs and frustrating everyone involved. Entire storylines were rewritten mid-filming, sometimes without the actors knowing where their characters were ultimately headed. The ending, in particular, caused turmoil. The studio wanted a neat conclusion. The director fought for ambiguity. What was finally delivered to audiences was a compromise, but one that carried a strangely poetic weight, mirroring the protagonist's ongoing struggle. The irony is that the indecision behind the camera gave the film an aura of uncertainty that perfectly matched the narrative on screen. Equally strange were the settings themselves. Many of the European cities used as backdrops were not chosen for spectacle but for their ordinary, lived-in feel. The filmmakers wanted streets that felt authentic, places where danger could lurk in an alley you might walk past on a regular day. In Paris, one particular car chase became legendary, not only for its tight, nerve-wracking execution but for the fact that the crew had to navigate an endless maze of permits and restrictions. What ended up on screen was the result of guerrilla-style shooting, stealing moments of authenticity in crowded streets where bystanders often didn't know a film was being shot. The rawness of those moments heightened the sense of reality, giving the chase sequences their unforgettable grit. Even stranger, the film's success almost didn't happen. When test audiences first saw it, reactions were mixed, even hostile. Viewers felt the film was confusing, disjointed, too quiet in places where they expected explosions. Executives panicked, considering shelving it or cutting it down to a generic thriller. Among the trivia lies another oddity: the use of languages. The protagonist's ability to slip into different tongues without thinking, French, German, Italian, was not heavily scripted at first. It became an improvisational detail, a choice made during filming that underscored the strangeness of his fractured mind. The actor delivered these lines with an unsettling naturalism, adding to the sense that his character carried skills he could not consciously access. That detail, small as it was, deepened the illusion that he was a man haunted by abilities without memory of how he earned them. There were also unusual coincidences surrounding the film's release. It arrived in a world still raw from geopolitical upheaval, where trust in government agencies was fractured, and the idea of operatives working in shadows carried a different resonance. Audiences projected their own suspicions onto the story, finding in it a reflection of real-world fears. In a strange twist, what began as an adaptation of a Cold War-era novel became an eerily relevant parable for a new century, where surveillance, hidden wars, and invisible powers shaped lives more than ever. The casting of secondary characters carried its own strange weight. Several of the assassins chasing the protagonist were played by performers with strong martial backgrounds, yet their screen time was fleeting. Their characters existed only to embody the system's cold efficiency, vanishing as soon as they were dispatched. The brevity of their roles left audiences craving more, but that brevity was the point. They were not individuals, but extensions of a faceless machine. It was a chilling detail that blurred the line between man and program. Another little-known fact is the way weather shaped the shoot. In one key scene, heavy snow blanketed the set unexpectedly, and rather than fight it, the filmmakers embraced it. The result was a haunting, dreamlike quality to the sequence, as if the protagonist's fractured world were mirrored by the shifting environment itself. Such moments were not planned, yet they lent the film an authenticity that no storyboard could have captured. Perhaps the strangest legacy of the film is how it redefined an entire genre by accident. It stripped down action, psychological weight, and insistence on realism pushed spy thrillers into a new era. What began as a chaotic, troubled production became a blueprint for modern espionage cinema. The strangest fact of all might be that none of it was intentional. It was born of compromise, struggle, and the stubborn refusal to abandon authenticity even when the odds seemed stacked against it. And in that sense, the film mirrors its hero perfectly. Just as the man without a name survived against impossible odds, carving out his identity from chaos, the movie itself survived its troubled birth to emerge as something unforgettable. It became stronger not in spite of its flaws, but because of them. To understand this story from a critical lens is to step back and notice not just the action, the chases across rooftops, the fights that erupt with startling precision, but the atmosphere that holds it all together. Beneath its pulse-pounding surface lies a meditation on identity, trust, and the cost of being shaped into something less than human. The narrative does not present itself as a tale of conquest but as a fractured mirror, forcing both protagonist and audience to confront the uncomfortable question: what if everything you know about yourself is a lie? And what if that lie was built deliberately by those in power? One of the film's most significant events is the very opening, where a man drifts nameless in the sea. On its face, it is a rescue scene, a survival moment. But through a critical perspective, it is a rebirth. Water becomes womb, the sea becomes a grave and a cradle all at once, and when he rises out of it, stitched together by strangers, he is both newborn and revenant. His memory has been stripped, and in that absence he is paradoxically more free than he ever was before. Critics often point to this scene as a metaphorical baptism, though not of redemption. It is a baptism of disorientation, a plunge into the unknown that sets the stage for everything that follows. The Zurich bank vault sequence is another event ripe for analysis. Here, our protagonist confronts the material residue of lives he cannot remember. Cash, weapons, passports with faces that belong to him but names that do not. From a critical standpoint, this moment captures the alienation of modern identity, fractured into bureaucratic tokens and transactional numbers. He is not a man but a collection of papers and codes, the embodiment of a system that values operatives not as people but as interchangeable assets. The sterile vault becomes a stage for existential horror, proof that his existence is a construct, not a life. The Paris apartment scene offers yet another layer. Critics often point to its duality. On one hand, it provides the comfort of recognition, a space that seems to suggest home. On the other, it shatters that comfort with violence as assassins burst through the walls. From a symbolic perspective, the apartment is memory itself, a place that feels familiar yet cannot be claimed, a sanctuary that proves illusory. When blood spills across its floors, it underscores the theme that no place is truly safe when the past itself is weaponized against you. The car chase through Paris streets is more than spectacle. Critics frequently note that it subverts expectations. Where earlier thrillers celebrated sleek cars and glamorous stunts, this chase embraces clunky realism. The battered vehicle screeches, stalls, squeezes through impossibly narrow passages, embodying desperation rather than glamour. From a critical angle, it's not just about escape. It's about stripping away the polished image of espionage and grounding it in something raw, ordinary, and chaotic. In doing so, the film redefined how cinema approached action. Less balletic, more brutal, less fantasy, more panic. The assassins sent after him serve not merely as obstacles but as distorted reflections. Each encounter is a dialogue, even if words are few. Critics interpret these figures as doubles. Men who show what he is, what he was meant to remain. Their silence, their precision, their willingness to die without hesitation, all highlight the protagonist's anomaly. He hesitates, he questions, he refuses. In literary terms, they are foils, but in thematic terms, they are mirrors showing the thin line between obedience and rebellion. Each death is not just survival. It is a confrontation with a self that could have been permanent. Perhaps the most critical moment comes when memory surges back in fragments, revealing the mission that unraveled him. He had been sent to kill, yet in the decisive moment, he faltered. Compassion broke through the programming. Critics see this not as weakness but as the film's central pivot. It is the moment where humanity triumphs over conditioning, where conscience proves stronger than indoctrination. In broader thematic analysis, it suggests that even in the most dehumanized systems, cracks exist where morality seeps through. This refusal to kill becomes both his damnation, marking him as a failure in the eyes of his handlers, and his salvation, preserving the possibility of becoming more than a weapon. There were also moments of uncanny coincidence. A snowstorm that interrupted one shoot became a blessing in disguise, transforming a scene into something visually haunting. Rather than halt production, the team embraced the weather, capturing images that draped the protagonist's journey in a wintry melancholy. Nature, indifferent yet poetic, became an uncredited collaborator, giving the film textures that could never have been fabricated. Among the fun facts lies the curious detail of language. The decision for the protagonist to slip naturally into French, German, and other tongues was not heavily scripted but emerged during production. The actor leaned into this improvisation, creating moments where his character startled even himself with the fluency of his words. It became one of the film's most memorable character quirks, underscoring the uncanny nature of his fractured identity. The supporting cast brought its own flavor of unpredictability. Several of the assassins who crossed his path were played by actors with deep martial training, yet their appearances were fleeting by design. They existed not as characters with arcs but as embodiments of the system's faceless menace. On set, their fight scenes often ended in bruises, both staged and real, as the choreography demanded full commitment to raw, unsanitized combat. Behind the camera, the cinematographer embraced a restless style, using handheld cameras to inject instability into nearly every sequence. This decision was controversial at the time. Executives feared it would disorient audiences, but it gave the film a unique grammar, one that echoed the protagonist's fractured perspective. The shaky, intimate frames became part of the DNA of modern action filmmaking, influencing countless imitators. Editing became its own battlefield. Endless hours of footage piled up, reflecting the chaos of production, and piecing it together was less about following a plan than about discovering one. The editors spoke of finding the film in the cutting room, whittling down tangents and weaving fragments until a coherent rhythm emerged. This process birthed sequences that felt spontaneous and urgent, their rough edges intentionally left visible. The polish of typical studio action was rejected in favor of something that felt lived in, scarred, imperfect, just like the protagonist himself. Perhaps the most ironic production fact is that many executives nearly gave up on the film. Early test screenings were disastrous, with audiences confused and restless. Some wanted it shelved, others demanded drastic changes. Yet the very qualities that rattled those first audiences, the quiet stretches, the stripped-down realism, the refusal to spoon-feed, became the elements that later critics praised as revolutionary. What had once been seen as weakness turned into a new language for spy thrillers, shaping cinema in ways no one predicted. In the end, the film's production is remembered not for smooth execution but for resilience. It was, in every sense, A survival story. Directors clashed with studios, actors pushed themselves beyond expectation, crews scrambled through bureaucratic and environmental hurdles, and editors stitched coherence from fragments. Out of that chaos emerged a work that redefined its genre. Just as its protagonist clawed his way from the sea with nothing but scars and instincts, the film clawed its way from production turmoil with nothing but raw talent and stubborn persistence. And like him, it emerged not polished, not pristine, but unforgettable. The first image that lingers after the opening storm of water and darkness is not just of a body pulled from the sea, but of the world around him, cold, gray, anonymous. The settings of this film are never neutral. They are characters in their own right, shaping the protagonist's confusion, reflecting his fractured mind, and reminding us that space itself can hold memory. To watch him stumble through Europe is to walk through landscapes that seem both familiar and hostile, every cobblestone street or sterile office becoming part of his disorientation. The Mediterranean, where his body is first discovered, feels less like a location and more like a metaphor. It is a place of rebirth, yes, but also of oblivion. Its endless waters hold no boundaries, no identities, no borders, only the suggestion that whatever life he had has been erased by the tide. The fisherman's boat, with its creaking wood and dim lantern light, contrasts brutally with the sleek and hidden machinery of the intelligence world that soon encircles him. That boat is the last time he is truly free, a cradle of anonymity before the hunt begins. When he steps into Zurich, the city itself becomes an extension of his confusion. The clean lines of Swiss architecture, the glass and stone facades, the quiet efficiency of the bank, all of it reflects a world that knows exactly what it is, while he does not. The bank vault sequence, set against sterile metal and numbered order, becomes an architectural metaphor for his fractured self. Inside drawers and boxes lie his supposed identities. Neat, compartmentalized, as though his existence could be reduced to files and passports. The very design of Zurich in the film feels like a judgment, its order mocking his chaos. Paris, however, is different. The city breathes. Its streets curve like questions, its alleys close in like secrets, its apartments feel lived in rather than curated. Paris mirrors his mind more closely than Zurich ever could. Familiar but unknowable, intimate but dangerous. The apartment he discovers there is one of the most potent cinematic spaces in the film. At first glance, it offers sanctuary. The clothes neatly folded, the photographs arranged with care, the furniture suggesting a life paused rather than abandoned. But as assassins smash through its windows, the apartment becomes an ambush, revealing that even spaces of apparent safety are traps. Paris, then, is not a city of love in this story. It is a labyrinth of betrayal. From a cultural perspective, the film landed at a time when audiences were ready to question institutions of power. Released in the early 2000s, its depiction of secret programs, surveillance, and operatives as disposable cogs resonated in a world grappling with anxieties about government transparency, hidden wars, and the erosion of privacy. Critics often point out that the film's success was not simply due to its thrilling plot but because it tapped into this broader distrust. It was espionage reimagined not as glamorous adventure but as psychological and moral burden. Even the romance at the center is viewed critically as subversive. Instead of being a convenient subplot, it becomes a counterpoint to violence. Critics highlight how the woman is not there merely for beauty or comfort. She embodies the possibility of a life outside the machine. Their connection is fragile, awkward, born of necessity rather than sweeping declarations, and yet that fragility is what makes it authentic. It resists Hollywood cliché and becomes instead a study in intimacy under fire. Two strangers clinging to each other not because destiny demanded it but because survival did. Critics also examine the film's style as an event in itself. The handheld camera work, the jittering frames, the lack of glossy polish, all of these techniques were divisive at first. Some accused it of being messy, even disorienting. But with time, it became clear that this style was intentional. It mirrored the protagonist's fractured perspective, the instability of a life built on lies. The very grammar of the film reinforced its themes, a decision that set it apart from the slick thrillers that had come before. The conclusion, where he chooses to abandon the system rather than reclaim it, became a critical point of discussion. Most spy films end with the protagonist reaffirming their role, their loyalty, or their place in the structure. Here, he does the opposite. Critics often argue this is what gave the story its staying power. It refused resolution. Instead of closure, it offered defiance. Instead of peace, it gave ambiguity. In doing so, it aligned itself less with escapist fantasy and more with existential reflection. Looking back, critics often agree that the film reshaped the spy thriller genre. Its events were not just plot points but disruptions of expectation. The quiet opening instead of a loud one, the clumsy car chase instead of a sleek one, the hesitant killer instead of a ruthless one, the fractured identity instead of the confident spy. Each inversion created a new language for the genre, one that countless successors would mimic but few could replicate with the same authenticity. From beginning to end, the critical lens reveals that the film's power lies not in its surface thrills but in its underlying unease. It is a story about memory, yes, but more than that, it is a story about systems and the individuals who resist them, about the fragile persistence of humanity in places designed to erase it. Every event, every choice, every stylistic flourish reinforces this haunting truth: that identity is not what is given to you by institutions or passports or programs. Identity is what you choose when the system finally fails you. The story of how this film came to life is almost as turbulent, secretive, and improvisational as the story it tells on screen. To step behind the camera is to find yourself in another kind of spy thriller, one set not across the rooftops of Europe but in the boardrooms of studios, on damp shooting locations, and in editing rooms that glowed long after midnight. The production itself was a battleground of clashing visions, of calculated risks and improvised rescues, of compromises that accidentally birthed genius. It is here, in the chaos of creation, that the film's strange alchemy can be best understood. The director approached the project with a hunger to strip espionage cinema down to something raw and believable. Gone would be the champagne-soaked glamour of tuxedoed operatives. In its place would stand a man more haunted than heroic, more broken than suave. This philosophy clashed almost immediately with the studio, who envisioned something more traditional, a glossy action piece with a clear formula. The tension between these two visions ignited from the start, simmering on set and boiling over in the editing bay. What the world eventually saw was neither side's original plan but something forged in fire, a hybrid that carried the fingerprints of conflict on every frame. Filming itself was a relentless ordeal. European locations, while atmospheric, brought logistical nightmares. Streets that looked cinematic often came with labyrinths of red tape, permits delayed, police presence complicated, and the sheer unpredictability of shooting in crowded, lived-in spaces constantly threatened to derail progress. Yet, these very obstacles contributed to the film's realism. When a car screeched too close to a vendor's stall or when pedestrians scattered in genuine shock, the cameras caught the pulse of authenticity. Some of the most celebrated sequences owe their raw edge not to careful planning but to the unpredictability of reality bleeding into fiction. The car chase through Paris is a perfect example. What viewers remember as a tightly choreographed ballet of chaos was, in fact, partly improvised guerrilla filmmaking. Permits limited where and how long they could shoot, forcing the crew to grab what they could in stolen bursts of time. Real traffic became part of the sequence, forcing the stunt team to adapt on the fly. The resulting footage carried a jittering, claustrophobic tension that no amount of storyboarding could have manufactured. It was less spectacle and more panic, a chase that felt as desperate as it looked. Combat training for the lead actor also shaped the film in unusual ways. He was not known for action, but he approached the role with unflinching commitment, immersing himself in disciplines such as Kali and Jeet Kune Do. The stunt coordinators introduced techniques that emphasized economy of motion. Short, brutal strikes, efficient disarms, and the kind of violence that looked improvised rather than rehearsed. During rehearsals, the actor began instinctively weaving these movements into scenes, surprising both his co-stars and the camera crew. The realism of his fights came from this foundation. He wasn't pretending to be dangerous. He was embodying the very training his character would have endured. The script itself was a living organism, rewritten constantly as filming progressed. Writers were flown in mid-shoot, tasked with reshaping dialogue or reworking entire sequences. This constant evolution frustrated cast and crew alike, but it mirrored the protagonist's own disorientation. Just as he pieced together his identity fragment by fragment, the film itself found its identity through scattered rewrites and last-minute pivots. The uncertainty on set sometimes leaked into the performances, lending scenes an undercurrent of tension that audiences would later interpret as deliberate atmosphere. Reshoots became almost their own production. Months after principal photography wrapped, the cast was called back to shoot new sequences, particularly to reshape the ending. The studio wanted clarity. The director wanted ambiguity. Their compromise led to a finale that resisted neat closure, a decision that ultimately elevated the film. Ironically, what began as a point of conflict became a defining strength, leaving the audience unsettled in exactly the way the story demanded. Critics often note how the filmmakers used ordinary spaces to heighten realism. A car chase does not thunder across empty highways, but through cramped Parisian streets where every turn feels too tight, every alley barely wide enough to breathe. The setting itself creates the tension. These are not glamorous boulevards cleared for cinematic grandeur. They are lived-in streets filled with parked cars, startled pedestrians, and corners sharp enough to break bone. In this way, the chase sequences derive their power not from spectacle but from claustrophobia. The city presses against him, turning the geography of Paris into an accomplice of danger. Europe itself becomes a character of many faces. From the sterile coldness of government offices to the warmth of roadside diners where fleeting moments of trust unfold, the film builds a patchwork of places that feel both grounded and symbolic. Even the weather conspires in its storytelling. A sudden snowfall in one sequence wraps the world in silence, echoing the protagonist's isolation. Fog rolls through alleyways like memory itself, thick, obscuring, impossible to grasp. These are not coincidences of location scouting. They are deliberate choices to make the very air reflect the uncertainty of a man without a past. The cinematography cements this relationship between setting and psychology. Handheld cameras keep the viewer unsteady, never allowing us the comfort of smooth, sweeping shots. The jitter and shake echo the instability of identity, the sense that nothing is fixed, nothing is reliable. Close-ups of cramped stairwells, over-the-shoulder perspectives in crowded streets, rapid cuts during fights. All of these stylistic decisions force the audience to feel as trapped and reactive as the protagonist himself. We are not watching from a safe distance. We are dragged into the chase. Lighting, too, plays a crucial role. Shadows dominate interiors, while exteriors are often washed in a cold, natural light that refuses glamour. The lack of artificial sheen makes every location feel unadorned, as though we are peering into the unfiltered truth of these places. In Zurich, the light bounces off glass and steel, sharp and unforgiving. In Paris, it seeps in through narrow windows, muted and uncertain. Even the fisherman's boat at the beginning is lit in a way that emphasizes fragility, the dim lantern glow against endless darkness. These contrasts subtly underscore the stages of his journey, from oblivion to confrontation to fragile awakening. Sound design fuses with setting to anchor the experience. The echo of footsteps in stairwells, the muffled hum of traffic outside an apartment, the metallic slam of a bank vault door, each sound reinforces the tangibility of these spaces. Unlike many action films that drown scenes in orchestral bombast, this one often pulls back, letting the ambient noise of the setting itself create tension. Silence becomes weaponized. The absence of score in certain moments makes every creak of a floorboard, every whisper of wind, unbearably loud. The environment itself seems to conspire against him, reminding us that he is never alone, never safe. The film's settings are not chosen for beauty. They are chosen for truth. Each location carries meaning beyond geography. The sea births him. Zurich dehumanizes him. Paris tests him. Anonymous safehouses turn into killing fields. Crowded streets become stages where anonymity is both shield and trap. By the end, when he disappears once more, the audience feels as though the world itself has swallowed him, as though every alley and shoreline has conspired to both reveal and conceal his identity. Through setting and cinematic language, the story crafts an atmosphere of constant dislocation. You never feel at home because he never does. The architecture, the light, the sound, all are tuned to echo the story's central theme. Identity is unstable, and the world around you reflects that instability. By the time the credits roll, you are not left with images of explosions or monuments, but with the sensation of moving through spaces that are both familiar and alien, much like the mind of the man at the film's center. Every film carries two stories. One plays out on screen, framed in the lens and cut to rhythm. The other unfolds in the unseen corridors of its making. To walk behind the set of this particular film is to step into an arena not unlike the one its protagonist inhabits, filled with secrecy, sudden pivots, and a constant sense that nothing is entirely under control. The behind-the-scenes tale is one of friction and resilience, of accidents that became breakthroughs, and of artists who stumbled into invention while trying to survive chaos. The director arrived with a vision: strip espionage of its glossy tuxedos and champagne flutes, and replace it with raw, unsettled humanity. But vision alone could not steady the storm that followed. From the earliest days, there were arguments over tone, over pacing, over how much mystery an audience could tolerate. Studio executives wanted clarity. The director wanted ambiguity. Each day on set became a tug of war, and the tension was palpable. Crew members spoke of the atmosphere as though they were watching two forces locked in silent combat, much like the protagonist and his hunters. One of the most vivid behind-the-scenes realities was the script itself, forever in flux. Whole chunks of dialogue arrived rewritten in the morning, and actors often learned their lines just minutes before cameras rolled. The lead would sometimes ask, "Where is my character headed?" only to be told, "We'll know by tonight." This constant rewriting bred frustration, but it also produced a strange authenticity. The uncertainty the actor carried into his performance mirrored the uncertainty of the character he played. Every furrowed brow, every pause before a decision, carried with it not just fictional confusion but real-world bewilderment. Training for the physical demands of the role was grueling. The lead immersed himself in martial arts sessions that left him bruised and exhausted, yet exhilarated. In rehearsals, he would throw himself into fight sequences so fiercely that stuntmen left the mat shaking their heads. One coordinator recalled that his movements, though newly learned, carried a sharpness that startled even seasoned professionals. Behind the camera, whispers grew. This wasn't just an actor performing choreography. This was a transformation, the birth of someone audiences would believe could dismantle an assassin with his bare hands. The car chase through Paris became a saga all its own. Permits were limited, police supervision strict, and yet the vision demanded realism. The crew found themselves staging guerrilla shoots, darting into real traffic, capturing moments before being forced to move along. Pedestrians on the street sometimes had no idea a film was being shot, their startled reactions becoming immortalized in the final cut. The battered car itself became almost like another character. Mechanics patched it together after each take, coaxing it back to life for one more bone-rattling run through the city's arteries. Then there were the reshoots. Months after filming wrapped, executives insisted on new material, believing the story as it stood was too fragmented. The director resisted, but the calls for change grew louder. When the actors returned, they stepped once more into characters they thought they had left behind. Entire days were spent reworking the ending, experimenting with tones that swung from neat closure to total ambiguity. What the world ultimately saw was the uneasy compromise of these battles. Ironically, that very compromise, the refusal to give either side everything, gave the finale its enduring resonance. On set, camaraderie formed in unlikely ways. The lead and his co-star, whose chemistry felt tentative on screen, carried that same hesitancy off-screen, gradually building trust as the shoot dragged on. Their wariness mirrored the fragile bond between their characters, and the filmmakers leaned into it. Scenes were left raw, allowing silences to stretch, letting awkward pauses become part of the texture. The relationship you see on screen is not manufactured chemistry but the natural evolution of two people learning to depend on each other amid the chaos of production. One curious detail is how weather intruded. Snowstorms, fog, unexpected rains. All of them disrupted shooting schedules, yet instead of fighting nature, the crew surrendered to it. The snow that blankets certain sequences was not scripted but seized in the moment. What could have been a disaster became poetry, transforming the world of the film into something colder, more dreamlike, more in tune with the isolation of its protagonist. The cinematography team wrestled with technique. The decision to embrace handheld cameras caused debates that raged well into post-production. Some felt it would alienate viewers. Others argued it would immerse them. The cinematographer defended it fiercely, claiming that the instability of the frame was the very point, that the audience needed to feel the ground shifting under their feet, just as the protagonist did. Looking back now, it is difficult to imagine the film shot any other way, but at the time, the choice felt like a gamble that might sink the entire project. Editing was another battlefield. With reels upon reels of footage, the editors joked that they were less cutting a film than solving a puzzle with missing pieces. The narrative had to be reshaped again and again, scenes stitched together in new orders, subplots trimmed until only the essential pulse remained. In this crucible, the final identity of the film emerged, not from a single guiding hand, but from countless revisions, each carrying the fingerprints of conflict and compromise. What is most striking about the behind-the-scenes journey is how closely it mirrors the protagonist's arc. Just as he clawed his way from chaos toward a fragile sense of self, the film clawed its way through production storms toward an identity no one had planned but everyone eventually embraced. Both man and movie survived by improvisation, by resilience, by refusing to be erased despite the forces pulling at them from all sides. And so, when the film reached audiences, its rawness carried an authenticity that no amount of polish could have achieved. It bore its scars openly, and those scars became its strength. Behind the scenes, tempers had flared, scripts had splintered, weather had conspired, and yet from that storm emerged something enduring. The film was not crafted in perfect harmony, it was wrestled into existence. And perhaps that is why it resonates so deeply. It feels less manufactured than lived. Themes in this story seep into the bones of the film like water into stone. They are not shouted through dialogue or plastered across exposition. They linger in silences, in glances, in the way a city street seems both welcoming and hostile. To watch it closely is to feel the weight of ideas pressing beneath the surface, each symbol a quiet signal, each theme a thread binding the fragments of the narrative together into something larger than action. At the heart lies identity, or rather, the absence of it. The protagonist is a man reborn without memory, his entire existence stripped to instinct. On one level, this is a thrilling mystery. Who is he, and what has been done to him? But beneath that surface hums something more universal, the human terror of not knowing oneself. Memory is not just recollection, it is anchor, it is proof of belonging, it is continuity. By taking it away, the story asks, if you woke tomorrow with nothing but muscle memory and scars, who would you be? Would you still be you, or merely a hollow shell waiting to be filled by the world around you? This question turns each fight, each moment of hesitation, into more than survival. It becomes a meditation on existence itself. The theme of control threads through every frame. The protagonist is not merely hunted, he is owned. His very body is a testament to programming, trained to react faster than thought, conditioned to kill without hesitation. He is not an individual but a product, a tool built by faceless architects. In this lies one of the film's most chilling ideas, that systems do not need loyalty, they only need obedience. Governments, agencies, institutions, all of them are depicted not as protective but as parasitic, consuming individuality to maintain power. The man at the center becomes dangerous not because of what he remembers, but because he begins to reject the leash they placed on him. Violence in this film is not spectacle. It is symbolism. Each fight is stripped of choreography's elegance, replaced with brutality that feels improvised, functional, ugly. It symbolizes the rawness of survival and the dehumanizing nature of his training. Yet, in the pauses between blows, something emerges. Hesitation. He is not the perfect killer his handlers designed. Compassion seeps into the cracks. His refusal to complete a mission, his horror at what he is capable of, become acts of rebellion. In a world built on efficiency and obedience, hesitation becomes the ultimate form of resistance. Another recurring theme is trust. Fragile, fleeting, constantly tested. The relationship he forms with the woman is not born of sweeping romance but of necessity. Yet in the crucible of pursuit, necessity hardens into something deeper. Critics often argue that she represents the possibility of humanity, a life beyond the machinery of espionage. She is trust embodied. Her choice to remain with him, despite fear, becomes one of the story's most radical statements. In a narrative built on betrayal, her loyalty is rebellion. The theme here is clear. Survival may depend on instinct, but life depends on connection. Settings themselves carry symbolic weight. The sea at the beginning is more than backdrop. It is oblivion and rebirth. The Zurich bank, with its drawers of currencies and passports, becomes a coffin of false identities, each name a reminder that he has been fractured into pieces that do not belong to him. The Paris apartment symbolizes memory, familiar, intimate, but ultimately unsafe, shattered by intrusion. Even the snow that blankets one sequence carries metaphor, purity layered over violence, silence over chaos, nature indifferent to the wars of men. Each location speaks, each environment echoing the internal state of the man wandering through them. The symbolism of doubles deepens the story. Every assassin sent after him is not simply an enemy but a reflection, a version of himself had he remained obedient. Their silence, their efficiency, their willingness to vanish into anonymity mark them as ghosts of the life he was designed to live. By confronting them, he is confronting himself. When they fall, it is not just a tactical victory but a symbolic rejection of the identity imposed on him. Each encounter says, "This is what you could have been. Do you still choose otherwise?" Memory, or the lack of it, becomes another layer of symbolism. The fragments that return are jagged, incomplete, always arriving at the worst moments. They symbolize trauma, not the kind that fades, but the kind that resurfaces unbidden, breaking into the present with violent force. His amnesia is not a clean slate but a wound, bleeding pieces of truth he cannot control. And yet, paradoxically, the absence of memory allows him to rebuild. Forgetting becomes both curse and liberation, forcing him to ask not, "Who was I?" but "Who will I become?" Themes of morality run like an undercurrent. In the climactic revelation that he could not complete his mission because he saw innocence in the eyes of his target's children, morality triumphs over conditioning. This is the crux of his journey, to rediscover conscience in a world that demands its erasure. His hesitation, his refusal, his compassion, these are not flaws but salvation. The story insists that morality is not weakness, it is strength, even when it costs survival. Symbolism even extends to the style of filmmaking. The handheld camera, unsteady and restless, becomes a visual metaphor for dislocation, echoing the protagonist's fractured perception. The lack of sweeping scores in key moments symbolizes silence as both threat and clarity. Even the editing, abrupt, fragmented, disorienting, mirrors the way memory itself fractures, never giving the audience the comfort of stability. The film's form reflects its themes, turning cinematic language into symbolic reinforcement. At its core, the story is about reclamation. To reclaim one's identity, to reject systems of control, to choose conscience over obedience, to find trust in a world built on betrayal. The themes interlock like puzzle pieces. Identity, control, violence, trust, memory, morality. Each reinforces the other, painting a picture of a man who should have remained a weapon but instead became a human being. By the end, the symbolism is complete. The sea, which swallowed him in the beginning, becomes metaphor again as he disappears into anonymity, not as a pawn erased by power but as a man who has chosen his own path. He began as a blank slate forced upon him. He ends as a blank slate chosen by himself. The themes resonate because they do not stay trapped in espionage, they echo into the lives of every viewer who has ever asked, Am I who I am because I chose it, or because the world made me this way? To talk about how this film works is to enter the machinery of cinema itself, the way images are shaped, cut, and layered until they become more than story. Filmmaking techniques here are not ornamental. They are the heartbeat of the film's identity. Every choice of camera, sound, edit, and rhythm carries meaning, turning what might have been a conventional spy thriller into something raw, immediate, and enduring. To watch it is to feel craft at work, invisible yet insistent, like the pull of a current underwater. The most striking technique is the use of handheld cameras. In an era where action films still leaned toward polish and precision, this choice was radical. The cinematographer and director wanted instability. They wanted the audience to feel as though the ground was shifting under their feet, the same way the protagonist's identity shifted with every revelation. The resulting imagery is restless, frames jittering during car chases, faces caught half-lit and half-blurred in fights. Critics at first accused it of being messy, but that messiness was deliberate. It mirrored disorientation, forcing viewers to inhabit the same fractured perspective as the man on screen. What was once controversial became a blueprint, reshaping action cinema for years to follow. Editing reinforced this approach. Rather than the clean, extended takes of traditional spy thrillers, the film leaned into rapid cuts, fragments of perspective, abrupt shifts that never allowed the viewer to settle. A fight scene wasn't staged for beauty but for panic. The rhythm was jagged, breaths cut short, impact emphasized over spectacle. Editors spoke of piecing together chaos, treating each sequence like memory itself, incomplete, jagged, unreliable. The result was not clarity but immersion, drawing audiences into confusion so authentic it felt lived. Sound design played an equally vital role. Silence was weaponized. Where other films layered orchestral swells over chases and confrontations, this one often held back, letting the metallic slam of a gun, the screech of tires, the hollow echo of footsteps dominate. When music did enter, it pulsed like a heartbeat, minimalist and relentless. The contrast between silence and sound heightened tension, leaving viewers hyper-aware of the smallest noise. In stairwells, every creak was a threat. In apartments, every rustle in the dark could signal an assassin. The film's soundscape taught audiences to listen as though their own lives depended on it. Lighting, too, carried thematic weight. Natural light dominated, stripping away glamour. Zurich's glass and steel sterility gleamed with unforgiving brightness. Parisian apartments glowed dim and uncertain. Night streets wrapped figures in shadow. The refusal to indulge in stylized lighting grounded the film in a tactile realism. The world felt lived-in, scarred, as though you could step onto those streets and stumble into the same danger. Darkness was not dramatic. It was suffocating, honest, the way night feels when you're hunted. Fight choreography redefined cinematic violence. Instead of sweeping martial arts flourishes, the film embraced the brutal economy of Filipino Kali and Jeet Kune Do. Every move was designed to end a fight quickly. Disarms, joint breaks, short strikes with improvised weapons. This stripped-down realism was revolutionary. It didn't look rehearsed. It looked instinctive. The protagonist fought not like a performer but like a survivor, turning pens, rolled magazines, and kitchen knives into tools of survival. This choice symbolized his fractured identity. He didn't need memory to fight. His body remembered for him. The technique became so influential it shifted the genre's approach to combat entirely. The car chase through Paris was another technical triumph. Instead of relying on special effects or empty streets, the sequence was filmed in the cramped arteries of the real city. Narrow alleys, crowded boulevards, cars denting and scraping against stone walls. The realism was suffocating. Cameras were mounted low, often inside the car, giving the chase a claustrophobic immediacy. The result was not spectacle but survival. Every turn looked too sharp, every gap too narrow. The chase didn't feel staged, it felt stolen from reality. Thematically, these techniques worked together to dismantle the myth of the suave, unflappable spy. Here was no tuxedoed agent sipping martinis under perfect lighting. Here was a man gasping for air, sprinting through alleys, bruised and uncertain, yet deadly when cornered. The techniques made the genre human again, grounding fantasy in something that felt painfully authentic. Box office production tells another story. The film's road to release was as tumultuous as its shoot. Delays, reshoots, ballooning budgets. Executives feared disaster. Early test screenings rattled nerves, with some audiences calling it confusing, too subdued compared to the bombast of other thrillers. There were moments when shelving it seemed an option. But when it finally reached theaters, its uniqueness became its strength. Audiences responded to the grit, the humanity, the refusal to play by old rules. Word of mouth built steadily, transforming what had been seen as a troubled production into a sleeper success. Critically, it carved a niche. Reviewers praised its restraint, its authenticity, its willingness to portray espionage as psychological burden rather than glamorous adventure. The box office reflected this slow burn, with returns that surprised even skeptics. The film not only recouped its troubled budget but laid the foundation for an entire franchise. What had begun as a gamble became a cornerstone of modern action cinema, proving that audiences were ready for something stripped down, raw, and real. The irony is that its financial success was never guaranteed. Behind the numbers lies the same theme that pulses through the story itself: survival against the odds. Just as the protagonist clawed his way from anonymity to selfhood, the film clawed its way from studio skepticism to cultural landmark. Every dollar earned at the box office was another reminder that authenticity, however messy, can resonate more deeply than polish. The filmmaking techniques and financial journey mirror the film's themes seamlessly. Disorientation became style. Brutality became choreography. Silence became score. Ambiguity became marketing. What might have been flaws transformed into innovations, reshaping not just one story but an entire genre. Every story eventually circles back to silence, and this one is no exception. From the opening image of a man floating in the black waters of the Mediterranean to the final glimpse of him disappearing once again into anonymity, the journey has always been less about resolution and more about transformation. To conclude this film's story, and the story of its making, is to admit that it thrives in ambiguity. It resists neat endings, just as its protagonist resists the identity imposed upon him. And yet, in its refusal to tie every thread, it achieves a resonance that lingers long after the credits fade. Looking back over its arc, what emerges most clearly is that this is not just an espionage thriller, it is a meditation on identity. A man begins as absence, defined only by scars, instincts, and a number buried in his flesh. Through fragments of memory, confrontations with faceless assassins, and the fragile trust of a woman who refuses to abandon him, he claws his way towards something resembling selfhood. The fights, the chases, the whispered conspiracies, all are scaffolding for the deeper question: who are we when stripped of history? And who do we choose to become when history finally returns, broken and jagged? The film answers not with declarations but with refusals. The protagonist refuses to kill when conscience intervenes. He refuses to return to the machine that forged him. He refuses to accept the names stamped in passports or whispered in dossiers. In those refusals lies the story's power. Identity is not something handed to us by systems or documents. It is something reclaimed, fought for, and ultimately chosen. This refusal to submit, to resolve neatly into the shape others carved for him, is what turns his journey into more than survival. It becomes a declaration of humanity. The production itself mirrored this refusal. The set was a battlefield of competing visions, scripts torn apart and rewritten on the fly, scenes reshaped by weather and accident, a finale hammered into existence through compromise. What could have broken the film instead became its strength. Just as the protagonist emerged stronger from chaos, the movie emerged from production turmoil with a rawness that could never have been designed. Its scars became part of its texture, part of why it resonates. Hovering above them all are the men in suits, the architects of the program that created him. They are not presented as flamboyant villains but as bureaucrats of death, calculating, cold, faceless in their authority. They embody a truth more chilling than any single assassin. that systems, not individuals, create monsters. His rebellion against them is not just personal. It is symbolic, a refusal of the very structure that turned men into weapons. The suits remind us that evil often hides in plain sight, dressed in ordinary clothes, speaking in measured tones, carrying out atrocities with a pen instead of the gun. In this web of characters, the protagonist becomes the gravitational center, pulling everyone else into orbit. His identity crisis defines their roles. The assassins show what he could become, the woman shows what he could be, the suits show what he was made to be. Each interaction forces him to confront himself, to peel back layers of the past he fears yet cannot ignore. His journey is less about evading bullets than about deciding who he is when the bullets stop flying. The emotional weight of his character comes from restraint. He does not indulge in confessions, nor does he give long explanations of his turmoil. Instead, his humanity surfaces in silences, in the flicker of doubt before violence, in the tenderness he shows when the world isn't watching. The tension between his lethal skill and his fragile morality keeps the audience tethered to him. He is not a hero in the traditional sense. He is something more complicated, more unsettling, and therefore more real. By the end, his identity is not handed back to him by any authority. He reclaims it through rejection. He chooses to define himself not by the names in his passports, nor by the missions that once carved his life into fragments, but by the simple act of living beyond them. That choice, quiet yet defiant, is the most human act of all. He does not become whole by remembering the past. He becomes whole by deciding the past no longer owns him. Every character around him becomes a brushstroke in the portrait of a man who should not exist and yet does. A man who embodies violence but clings to conscience. A man who has been used as a weapon yet dares to imagine being something else. In the clash between memory and morality, he finds not an answer but a path. And in following that path, he transforms from shadow into man. Sometimes, the strangest truths about a film are not the ones you see on screen, but the ones whispered in the margins of its making. The story of this film is a labyrinth in itself, not only because of its protagonist's fractured identity but because the production mirrored that same sense of confusion, reinvention, and constant pursuit of clarity. Behind the glossy frames lies a saga of clashing visions, rewrites upon rewrites, and a set where chaos often marched hand in hand with brilliance. To begin with, the film was not supposed to look or feel the way it eventually did. Its production became infamous for what many described as filmmaking by survival, much like the journey of its hero. Directors, writers, and studio executives all tugged at its identity, pulling it in different directions. Scripts were drafted and redrafted, entire sequences scrapped, and endings debated deep into post-production. The film was meant to be a straightforward espionage thriller, yet every stage of its creation added layers of unease, hesitation, and unexpected discovery. That uneasy energy, strangely enough, bled into the very fabric of the movie, creating a realism that audiences would later praise. Cinematically, it shifted the language of an entire genre. Handheld cameras unsettled audiences at first but became the hallmark of realism in modern action. Brutal, efficient fight choreography replaced balletic spectacle, reminding viewers that violence is ugly, not glamorous. Silence and ambient noise were elevated to instruments of tension, proof that sometimes the absence of music carries more weight than any score. Car chases squeezed into the arteries of real cities, turning claustrophobia into adrenaline. Each of these choices redefined expectations, birthing imitators and influencing franchises far beyond its own. At the box office, it triumphed not through spectacle but through word of mouth. Audiences responded to its humanity, to its refusal to polish away confusion. What began as a gamble, feared by its own studio, transformed into a success that would spawn sequels and elevate its lead actor into an unlikely action icon. The financial survival of the film echoed its thematic survival, the story of a man and a movie that both refused erasure. Thematically, it leaves viewers with questions that extend beyond espionage. How much of who we are is memory, and how much is choice? How do systems, political, bureaucratic, institutional, reshape individuals into tools, And what does it take to reclaim one's humanity from that grip? And perhaps most importantly, what does it mean to live in a world where identity itself can be weaponized, fractured, rewritten? These questions do not end when the credits roll. They echo into our own lives, into our own confrontations with authority, memory, and morality. To conclude, then, is not to resolve but to reflect. This film stands as a story about a man who should have remained a weapon but instead became a human being. It is about the thin line between predator and prey, obedience and rebellion, memory and morality. It is about the way a stranger's loyalty can anchor you when you are lost, and the way refusal can define you more powerfully than obedience ever could. For viewers, it is an experience that reshaped the spy thriller not by adding extravagance but by stripping it away. For cinema, it is a turning point, a reminder that rawness, imperfection, and ambiguity can resonate more deeply than spectacle. For the character at its center, it is the story of a man who walked away not with answers but with freedom. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy, that both man and movie prove survival itself can be art. Not the survival of bullets and blades, but the survival of choice, of conscience, of self. From the sea he rose nameless. Into the world he disappears once more, not nameless but self-made. The journey is not about what he discovered, it is about what he chose to leave